She had the world at her feet and her soulmate by her side.
She finally had found herself.
Once she knew that she wanted to be with him and that was the one, she was committed.
But when tragedy strikes one dark winter's night, family and friends aren't sure who they can trust.
We were all looking over our shoulders in fear.
Everybody was a suspect in my eyes. Nobody was exempt.
It was like a phantom went and pulled off this crime, ran into the woods, and then completely disappeared.
Justice for the victim will prove elusive, but the investigation will ultimately expose a terrible truth.
He did not look like a cold-blooded killer, like somebody that could pull something like this off.
Humans have an immense capacity for love, but they're also very capable of tremendous evil.
You killed her. Yes or no?
Sunday, February 19th, 2012. It's a bitterly cold night in the South Boston neighborhood of Mattapan.
Most people around 9 o'clock are getting prepared for the next day. A lot of people was in their homes.
But on Alabama Street, residents there are about to find themselves caught up in a crime that will bring tensions in the neighborhood to a boiling point. It begins with 2 gunshots outside the home of Cynthia Ferguson.
Mom! Michael! Call 911. What's wrong? Are you okay? Someone shot Keosha. Call 911.
Her son, Michael, comes running into the house saying his girlfriend, Keosha Gilmore, had been shot.
We were notified by the operations division to head out to 26 Alabama Street for a woman who had been shot.
Officer Smith was the first officer arriving on scene. When he pulled up, he observed Michael Ferguson on the sidewalk with Keosha, who was out of the car at this point and on the sidewalk. He was falling apart, and he was crying.
What happened here? Officer, she been shot.
She had been shot twice, once in the head and once in the arm. Officer Smith immediately called for additional units and called for emergency medical services, the ambulance teams.
They responded relatively quickly to take Keosha to the hospital.
The situation did not look good.
You have a young lady, Keosha Gilmore, 25 years old. Gunshot that she suffered to her head was devastating, catastrophic.
Boston native Keosha Gilmore had a smile that could light up a room.
When you saw her, you couldn't help but to just change your whole attitude.
Though her parents split up and remarried while she was young, Keosha never wanted for love and attention.
She lived with me, and we really didn't have a big custody issue. It was just edged in stone that I would take care of her, and her father was always there if he wanted to spend some time with her.
Outgoing and intelligent, Keosha thrived in school. But perhaps her best trait was her kind heart.
Keosha was friends with everybody. She cared about everybody. She gave everybody a chance.
She always seemed to gravitate towards those who weren't as popular. Again, the whole making people feel good mechanism, I think, was probably what drove her to those kind of people.
People like Keosha's soft-spoken classmate, Christopher Jackson.
He was a quiet kid. Some would say introvert.
He appeared to me as somebody who struggled with social issues. Keosha seemed to be a nourishing person to him.
Though Keosha tended to gravitate toward outsiders when it came to friends, she was never at a loss for potential boyfriends.
She was a beautiful girl, and she was going to get that attention and that attraction. And you're young, so, you know, you explore, you date, you go out, you hang out.
But of all Keosha's gentleman suitors, none of them ever felt like the one to her.
She did have 2 other relationships. They were both about 1.5 years long, and one, I think, about 1.5 years, maybe 2 for one of them. She just knew that she wanted somebody that would be able to stand up for themselves, and that was important to her. So that was her type, I guess, somebody that just knew who they were.
In late 2006, Keosha landed a job at a local electronics store where she quickly rose through the ranks.
That company really embraced her and loved her. She had worked so hard, she had become an assistant manager. So I was very proud of her for that.
When she got that promotion, she saw something brighter for her future.
But what Kiosha didn't know at the time was that her job would lead her into the arms of 29-year-old Michael Ferguson.
He worked at a different retail store, and he said that he saw her walking, and he was like, I know, I want to hang out with that young lady.
Excuse me.
Hey,
Hey, looking good today.
do you say that to every girl that comes by?
Nah, just seen you around. I'm Michael.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. So, what you getting into later?
Well, working right now, but I'm about to head to lunch.
Oh, it's cool if I join you.
Nice try. Maybe next time.
She just wasn't interested at that time. Maybe a year later, he still kept expressing interest, and so finally she went out with Michael.
Though Michael seemed keen to jump right into a full-blown relationship, Kiosha made sure they took things slowly.
She took her time with him. And I think once she realized that maybe he wanted to be someone she wanted to move further along with, that's when he was introduced to the family.
At first, I was like, oh, I think he's maybe just a little bit too old. But after a few years, I realized they balanced each other out, and it wound up being a good thing because it was good for her and him. They both at that time knew what they were looking for.
I was happy because he was a good guy. And I think that's what every dad wants with their daughter.
Over the next several years, Michael and Kiosha's relationship deepened to the point that in 2008, they felt ready to take the next big step.
They decided to move in together. They both wanted to make that step to each other and spend time on their relationship. So I said, I'm in support.
Finding love to make that kind of commitment is beautiful. So I was really happy for her.
Being a dad, I'm a little worried, but I trust Kiosha's judgment because she came from a good home. And it went well.
He loved her. He took care of her. He watched out for her. He made sure she had things. He was a good guy.
Fast forward to February 19th, 2012, and Michael and Kiosha's dream life together has been struck down in a hail of gunfire.
Kiosha is shot twice at point-blank range. Michael is cradling her. He kisses her. It's an absolutely heartbreaking scene.
The family seemed very confused. They couldn't understand why this would have happened.
The answer to that question will propel police on a desperate search for the truth, and in the process, unearth a laundry list of potential suspects.
When the names would come up, we would run out and try to run down as much information about them as possible.
It was clear that what was going on in Kiosha's life was more than meets the eye.
After 5.5 years together, 25-year-old Kiosha Gilmore and 34-year-old Michael Ferguson had big plans for their future.
She was in love with, and he was in love with her.
She really cared for him. They decided to be committed to each other when they decided to move in together.
She was planning a life with Mike.
But on February 19th, 2012, the unthinkable happens. Kiosha is shot twice, right in front of Michael's mother, Cynthia Ferguson's home, and is teetering on the brink of death.
They told me that Kiosha was shot. I didn't know to what extent. All I know is I got sick and overwhelmed.
Based on the initial reports from the Boston Medical Services technicians, we felt that she would have a very small chance of survival.
From that moment in time, as soon as the nature of the injuries were established and realized, Boston police detectives from the homicide unit were contacted and responded.
As Kiosha is rushed to the hospital, Boston detectives arrive at the scene.
I got a basic lay of the land of what was present there when I arrived.
There was shattered glass on the ground, the victim's pocketbook, and on the sidewalk there was matter from the victim from her injuries.
With Kiosha's boyfriend, Michael Ferguson, on his way to the hospital with her, detectives begin looking for other potential witnesses.
And this is a very residential area, so there's no video cameras or surveillance cameras. We have to really rely on the people who are there to provide us the information we need to keep moving forward.
Asking people what they heard, what they might have seen, all sorts of questions like that.
Now, you said you were inside the house when the shooting happened?
Correct.
Tell me about it.
I was in the home, and my son ran in, and told me to call 911.
Okay.
And I came outside, and he was there with Kiosha. And that's all I saw.
You didn't hear anything or see anything suspicious?
No, I did not.
All right.
Cynthia Ferguson's statement is one that's echoed in interviews with others in the area.
The neighbors told police that they heard the gunshots. They didn't see anything.
With the interviews yielding little in the way of actionable intel, detectives decide to pay a visit to their only known eyewitness, 34-year-old Michael Ferguson.
When I first went to the hospital, I saw how broken he was. Man, that dude was devastated.
He was a mess. He was absolutely, totally distraught. More distraught than most people I've ever talked to.
Look, Michael, I know it's been a long, hard night, but we need you to try to think of everything that you possibly can to help us out with this.
God, I don't know it all happened so fast. Let's start from the beginning.
Michael had picked her up from work. They went to a local gas station to pick something up, and then they pulled in front of Michael's house and were having a conversation.
I had so many funny people come in today to the store and like all kind of.
He noticed a person walking down the street with a hoodie on, coming towards him, didn't really pay him any attention because it was just a person walking by.
I can hook you up with some new phones.
He raised the gun, pointed it, and fired 2 shots.
Michael is in his seat. He doesn't know what's happening. He looks up and his girlfriend is now slumped over in the seat. He gets out of the car and he actually can see a figure running off across the street.
The assailant then ran away into the New Calvary Cemetery, which abuts Alabama Street in Mattapan, and disappeared.
From that moment in time, as soon as the nature of the injuries were established and realized, Boston police detectives from the homicide unit were contacted and responded.
While it sounds like Michael is lucky to be alive, investigators can't help but wonder how he managed to escape the attack.
We didn't know what was going on with Michael and the fact that he wasn't injured.
Obviously, when somebody is killed, oftentimes it is a person who knows them. By ordinary and sensible police work, they of course would look at the boyfriend and look at the facts and circumstances to determine whether or not he would be a suspect.
We looked at this situation and said, how does someone walk up, shoot her in the head and the shoulder, and not even fire around in his direction?
Still, with no other witnesses or leads, detectives must take Michael's statement at face value.
Once we had gotten that information, I had requested the K-9 officers to come down to the location and take a look around and see if we could find any additional evidence or suspect.
Will police find evidence to support Michael's story? Or will it be exposed as a lie designed to conceal a far more haunting version of events?
Something inside of me was just like, he knows something or he saw something.
It's been hours since 25-year-old Keosha Gilmore was shot outside her boyfriend's mother's residence in Mattapan, Massachusetts.
The chances of her surviving were slim to none. I mean, they'd given us details. It was bad.
But detectives are already following up on a possible lead provided by Keosha's longtime boyfriend, Michael Ferguson.
Keosha's boyfriend alerted the police that the assailant came around, fired the shots into the car, and then ran off and ran across the street and into the New Calvary Cemetery.
Shortly thereafter, a K-9 officer came to the scene.
The K-9 locked onto a scent and directed its handler away from the crime scene.
She was able to get her dog over a kind of maybe a 5-foot, 6-foot stone wall that led into the New Calvary Cemetery.
That K-9 found 2 bags, and sticking out of one of those bags was a 6-shot revolver, and inside of the other bag was 2 latex gloves and a hat and a water bottle.
One of the SWAT guys who happened to be working did a thermal image and found that when he did a thermal image, there was a bright image that showed up.
The thermal imaging device is a useful tool to us. When a human being holds onto something metal, they transfer their heat into that piece of metal. That thermal energy, the heat, that'll show up on the thermal imaging device, in this case, a gun.
It appears that this is probably more likely than not going to be our weapon.
The canine unit tracked the scent from where the backpacks were over to an area just beyond the cemetery to a backyard on a street that ran along the backside of the cemetery.
That's where the trail kind of got lost. We searched that entire area, but we weren't able to find anyone.
For now, Kiyosha's assailant has managed to evade police. But the evidence he left behind sheds important new light on the shooting.
Given the way this shooting happened, where the person walked up, shot her, did not shoot at Michael Ferguson, we immediately realized that this was a targeted event. This was not a case of someone being a victim of robbery. This was not a case of a random act of violence.
This path that the killer took was the one path where he could run away and not worry about getting caught and not worry about getting seen and put a lot of distance between himself and the scene of the crime.
It appeared that something was going on and that these people, one or the other, was the intended target.
The question was, who would do this?
As detectives ponder this question, they receive heartbreaking confirmation from the hospital.
She was in the hospital for about a day, maybe a bit less, at around 4 o'clock on February 20th, 2012. She passed.
It was very weakening to know that we couldn't stop it from happening. We couldn't stop her from dying.
The loss of Kiyosha left me broken.
It was devastating because you don't think it would ever happen to you.
With the case now officially a homicide, investigators are more motivated than ever to get justice for Kiyosha's family.
We wanted to see if maybe we could find some fingerprints. We wanted to see what was going on with the firearm itself. And of course, any DNA evidence that may come up from the hat or the rubber glove would have been significant.
Detectives send the evidence off for processing. It's not long before the results come back.
The crime lab processed the items and found that there were DNA profiles on a number of the items from the backpacks.
They determined that the DNA from each of those items came from, for the better part, a single source. And the single source contributor of that DNA was one particular person. The question became, well, who is the contributor of that DNA? Who is the person who had carried these items into the cemetery?
Investigators scour their DNA database looking for a possible match.
The problem with the DNA profiles is that the person has to be in the system for us to be able to match them and identify them.
Unfortunately, there are no matches in the DNA database.
We couldn't narrow the assailant down because he either didn't have a record or hadn't yet submitted, a DNA profile following a felony conviction in Massachusetts.
They had to look somewhere else. They had to look at somebody who had a clean record, who had never done anything like this before.
And while Michael Ferguson's statement directed investigators to some critical evidence, the fact remains that he is the crime's only witness and its sole survivor.
Whenever you see a situation like this, you have to take a look at the boyfriend.
That's the first place you look because he's sitting just inches away in the car and he doesn't get shot. She does. What was the relationship between Michael and Kiyosha? Were they having difficult times? Was there something there? Was he jealous of her? Was something going on?
Detectives reach out to Michael for a second interview, hoping he will consent to more than just some routine questioning.
Their hope is that he will let them swab him for some of his DNA.
That DNA was hanging out there. It's almost like a tripwire.
But will this be the missing piece detectives need to catch Kiyosha's killer?
We didn't know what we had. None of it really made sense.
In the suburbs just south of Boston, police are on the hunt for the person responsible for the brutal slaying of 25-year-old Kiyosha Gilmore.
They've been able to build a DNA profile off of the weapon they found near the crime scene, but it isn't a match to anyone in the DNA database.
Now, detectives are circling back to the sole survivor of the attack, Kiyosha's live-in boyfriend, Michael Ferguson.
It's hard to explain why somebody would shoot and kill a 25-year-old woman who's just sitting in her car with her boyfriend, if the boyfriend had nothing to do with it.
While Michael seemed genuinely devastated by Kiyosha's death, maybe there was something more to the story.
Armed with the results of the DNA analysis, Detectives sit down with Michael for a formal interview.
Their hope is to get more information from him, but they're also hoping that he will voluntarily give them a DNA sample.
Michael, I want you to know we're going to do everything in our power to catch Keosha's killer. But in order to do that, I need to know everything about your relationship with her. You understand?
Yes.
Okay. So did y'all have any problems at all?
No, she was my soulmate.
It's then that Michael offers up some additional information. Information that adds a tragic new layer to Michael's sorrow.
I don't know if it's relevant, but Keosha and I got engaged a couple months back.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm supposed to get married today.
Keosha got shot on Sunday. She passed on Monday, but it was actually that Tuesday that they was gonna surprise me and my wife and, get married at the Justice of Peace.
That's when Michael Ferguson makes another startling admission.
He was concerned that perhaps she was killed as a result of his past.
He had a bit of a checkered past, involved in a couple of different things.
There's nothing really. Ran with the wrong crowd when I was younger, but I got out of that before I messed my life up. Only thing is, some of them weren't too happy about it.
The violence that takes place in Mattapan, a lot of it has to do with the gangs.
We immediately began thinking, is this a case where someone's trying to get a point across to him? We asked about people from his past that could be upset with him. Was there an old beef? Was there some situation from his life that someone was sending a message to him?
Michael tells police that only a few weeks earlier, he had a run-in with one of the toughest guys from his old crowd. A man named Jamal Thomas, who wasn't pleased that Michael had chosen the straight and narrow over the street life.
Oh, well, look who the hell it is. What's happening, man? You forgot about your boys?
Nah, man, like I told you before, I'm out that life. About to get married, man.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
So you think you better than us now, huh? Or maybe you just need a little reminder of who you really are.
Look, man, I don't want no trouble.
Yeah, better watch your back, man. Don't turn on family.
He felt that someone was coming after him, and this was their way to send a message to him.
We didn't know, could it possibly he had been the intended target?
While Michael has been nothing but cooperative so far, detectives can't officially remove him from their list of potential suspects until he supplies them with a sample of his DNA.
Michael was asked to provide a DNA sample to see if it was a match for the DNA found on the killer's belongings, and he readily agreed to do so.
The boyfriend's DNA profile did not match the assailant's profile.
There was no forensic evidence or evidence whatsoever which would suggest that that boyfriend had committed the crime or had anything to do with it.
The physical evidence, his reporting of the crime, his description of how it occurred, checked out. And therefore, while, you don't draw any immediate firm conclusions, the evidence suggests that he was not the assailant.
Following Michael's lead, detectives track down Jamal Thomas and bring him in for questioning. But after speaking with Jamal, detectives realize they reached another dead end.
There was nothing that came forward that led us to believe there was anything else to pursue.
With the lead from Michael's past proving fruitless, detectives turn their attention to Keosha's personal life.
We had to look at who's in her circle. Is this a disgruntled lover? Is this somebody at work? Is this, somebody that she's been beefing with?
Hoping to learn more about any enemies Keosha might potentially have, detectives turn to her grieving family.
Herman and Gloria were racking their brains to think of anything they could possibly give us, to give us something to look at, something to chase down.
There was nothing in her life that I was aware of that was alarming for someone to take her life.
Everybody that knew Keosha or anybody that she hung out with, they were straight up and up people, We never worried about Keosha being involved with drugs or partying, so it was totally mind-blowing. Like, who would do this?
However, Keosha's family does mention an old friend she grew up with.
Gloria and Herman kept coming back to the name of Chris, but they could not tell us what his last name was, where he lived, or anything. They just knew his name was Chris.
Keosha's parents claim Chris never seemed aggressive, but always seemed to want all of Keosha's attention.
We'd want to have more information, but it's something we can do. It's something we have to at least run down and do the very best we can to see if we can get more information about who this Chris was.
We went through Keosha's phone and we looked for anyone named Chris.
It's in Keosha's phone that detectives discover the contact information for a man named Chris. But is it the Chris they're looking for?
They were able to reach the Chris in Keosha's phone, and he agreed to meet the police for an interview.
They asked him, "Are you the Chris that's been friends with Keosha since middle school?" He says, "No, you must have me mixed up with another guy. I'm only her co-worker, and we're not really close at all."
The Chris at Radio Shack was white, and the other Chris that we were trying to look into was black. So we weren't really sure if there was going to be a connection with it or not.
While it became obvious pretty quickly that they had the wrong Chris, he was still very cooperative and agreed to provide the police with a DNA sample.
With no sign of the Chris Keosha's parents seem weary of, detectives reach out to Keosha's employer to see if she'd been in conflict with any of her coworkers. By doing so, they learn of an alarming incident that happened not long before the shooting.
There was a person, I think, that was selling drugs through the store, and Keosha was caught in the middle of this person being fired. We were informed of this situation, this person, and told we should look into it.
I mean, this is unacceptable. I can't have you doing this in the store.
Come on, it was outside.
It was right here. I saw you do it.
So what? What now?
I'm gonna have to ask you to leave.
This isn't over.
Obviously, this was a huge lead. A disgruntled employee could explain why Keosha and not Michael was targeted in the shooting.
Could this disgruntled employee be the suspect detectives have been searching for?
He had a motive for wanting to see her deceased.
Or is there even more to this twisted story than meets the eye?
As far as murder investigations go, it really doesn't get more complicated than this.
In the days following the murder of 25-year-old Keosha Gilmore, Boston detectives discovered that Keosha had recently fired an employee who she'd caught dealing drugs inside the electronics store where she was the manager.
Keosha was involved in this person being fired.
Anxious to know more, detectives track him down and bring him in for questioning.
They run down this ex-employee who claims he had nothing to do with the shooting, and he willingly submits a DNA sample.
Each time we turned the DNA in, we had this hope that, okay, maybe this is it.
Nothing came back on anything involving them.
We want to find this person, but we had gone to the point of collecting DNA samples on anyone in her phone that we thought could have anything to do with her, and we hadn't found anything.
With no other suspects and no additional evidence, Keosha's case grows as cold as the Boston winter.
They had DNA evidence, they had a witness, a vague description, but it all ended there. It was like a phantom went and pulled off this crime, ran into the woods, and then completely disappeared.
We really didn't have anything else we could do until we got a break.
Though detectives continue to follow up on any potential leads, an entire year passes with no new breaks in the case. Investigators are beginning to worry Keosha's murder might never be solved.
That was the mystery here for a full year. Who did this to Keosha?
It's a frustrating period. You know, sometimes these cases go cold for years and sometimes decades.
With detectives' best efforts still coming up short, Keosha's family decides to take matters into their own hands.
My husband had said to me, honey, we have to do something. They're kind of going cold with the case. They don't have any more leads to follow up on.
And that's when I said, you know what? We have to talk to Fox 25, Bob Ward, somebody, because we're not going to let Keosha die without finding out who did this to her.
Bob Ward, one of our leading reporters here in town who works for the local Fox affiliate, really interested in criminal justice, public safety type of issues.
He ran a series of unsolved murders that he would run periodically on the news channel.
About a year after this murder, I got a phone call from Herman Weathersby, Keosha's stepfather. He explained to me that his stepdaughter was murdered, the case was going cold. Would you please come and do a story? And that's how we got involved in this case. We decided to get involved because this case made no sense. How could this happen to this good family? We just felt like we need to do something, try to do something, and see if we can help.
He called me and said, we want to interview you. So I contacted my bosses, and they gave us permission to do the story, and we did it. It aired on, I believe it was February 5th, 2013, and on February 6th, I got a phone call that basically changed the whole course of the case.
Keosha's stepmom called in on the tipster's line because she remembered some information.
The night that our story ran, Keosha's stepmother went to bed that night thinking about the case. Then all of a sudden, she had a dream about Christopher and said his name out loud. And she just wondered about Christopher. Why did that come up?
The Christopher in question was Christopher Jackson, a friend from Keosha's childhood.
They knew each other in middle school and throughout high school. Sometimes he would give her a ride to work. Sometimes he would give her a ride home. They would go out to eat, sometimes in a group setting with a couple of other friends from school.
After high school, Christopher went out of his way to keep up with Keosha's love life.
You still talking to the old guy?
Nah, he's like old news. I think he might have been jealous of you, though.
Chris doted on her, even though the relationship was platonic, and you always wondered if Chris wanted more from it.
Although Keosha clearly viewed Chris as a good guy, he always gave Keosha's stepmother an uneasy feeling.
He was getting a little possessive. He seemed like he wanted to hang out with her a lot.
She began thinking back on Christopher and Keosha growing up and remembered a bizarre incident that happened years before.
Keosha's stepmother owned a hair salon, and what she remembers clearly is that one day, Keosha was coming in to work in the hair salon just for a day, just to help out. And she showed up with Chris Jackson.
Hey, hi, Keosha. Hi, Chris. Nice to see you. I am so happy you're here.
Well, you know I got you covered. No worries.
Thank you. There you go.
She remembers Keosha doing all the work and Christopher sitting in a corner just watching her. And he wouldn't get up and interact. He was just sitting there watching Keosha. And that unnerved her.
She said to us, you gotta look for this guy, Chris. And I said to her, look, I've been hearing about Chris for a year, but we can't find him.
We really wanted to kind of get back to this guy, Chris, and find out what was going on with him. So we went back and talked to Gloria, Keosha's mom, and tried to find out more information about who Chris was.
I go, we've never found this Chris. Is there anything you can tell me that would help us find what his full name is? And she said, I just finally got the courage to clean Keosha's room last week.
It was around the anniversary. I went in her room and I was just having a moment of reflection. And I saw her middle school yearbook, and I was flipping through the yearbook and I saw Mr. Jackson's name, Christopher Jackson.
This is really nothing more than a hunch, and an anecdotal story like this is not allowed to go on. But with a cold case such as this, detectives will take any lead they can get.
Though detectives know it's a long shot, they reach out to Christopher Jackson and ask him to come down to the station for an interview. Christopher agrees.
Chris, we really appreciate you coming in and talking with us today.
No problem. Glad to help any way I can.
We talked about some general things about the case and what we were trying to do, and the direction we were trying to go in, and we were trying to hold someone accountable for what happened to Keosha. He explained to us that he understood what we were trying to do, and he got it.
It's to our understanding, you all were really good friends?
Best friends.
Chris was kind of an off-to-the-side guy when it came to Keosha. If she needed something, she knew that he was reliable to come pick her up, to give her a ride if she needed a ride. She would spend some time with him, going to movies or going out to dinner or something like that.
Anytime since you were kids, you start getting feelings for Keosha?
You mean like besides best friends?
Yeah, besides best friends.
No, sir.
He was a really squared away kind of kid. He was very neat. He was very respectful, a little bit awkward, but a very nice kid.
Chris, you don't mind submitting your DNA today for us, just so I can cross you off the list?
Of course, no problem.
We conducted an interview probably 30 or 40 minutes long and, gave us a DNA sample. I asked him, I said, if we need to talk to you again, would you talk to us again? He said, yeah, sure. Sergeant Detective Brown and I were asking each other afterwards, do you think this kid could have done it?
There was no feeling between any of us as the detectives investigating the case that this was the guy.
We went and submitted the DNA sample and said, okay, here comes another one. Where do we go next? That's kind of what we felt like at the time. We were starting to lose faith that we'd ever get the right one.
But when Keosha's killer is finally unmasked, it will leave everyone involved in this tragic case speechless.
I just can't believe that somebody could really go that far.
What really happened to that girl, and why? just terrible.
It was awful. It made me question people.
You killed her. Yes or no? I don't really have a yes or no answer.
February 6, 2013. It's been a year since Keosha Gilmore was gunned down in her fiancé's car, and a news story has put her old friend, 26-year-old Christopher Jackson, on investigators' radar.
We kind of want to see what his relationship was with Keosha, ask him a few questions, get that DNA sample.
But after interviewing Christopher, it seems investigators are no closer to the truth.
He didn't have any criminal record. He didn't have anything. I mean, like nothing that put him on our radar screen.
Then, in early April of 2013, the unexpected happens.
The crime lab notified Detectives Brown and McLaughlin that the DNA swab from Christopher Jackson, in fact, was a match to the DNA evidence on the material that had been found in the cemetery.
They said there's the most definite match they'd ever had because of the single source that was in the sample. And they identified him as our suspect.
We were very surprised, to say the least. We weren't ready for it, and we had to get going and move quickly.
On April 5th, 2013, detectives asked Christopher to come in for a second interview.
The detectives got in touch with Christopher Jackson again, asked him if he would be willing to come in and answer more questions. He was willing, and a couple hours later, he showed up at headquarters.
This time, they take a more aggressive approach when questioning him.
We put pictures out of the gun. We showed him pictures of the backpack. We showed him pictures of the hat and the contents that were in there.
Did you recognize this here? Nope, never seen it before.
I explained to him that we had DNA in those things and that the DNA came back to him.
He just kind of acquiesced and realized that we pretty much had him.
We asked him, what is this? Why did this happen? What brought you to this? Was there some reason? Is there something we don't understand?
You killed her. Yes or no? I don't really have a yes or no answer. It's a bad situation. But by us being able to let the family know why you did something like this, it can help bring closure down the road and potentially may change some things. I made a mistake of letting my anger overshadow my intelligence.
Christopher Jackson admitted that he liked Keosha Gilmore, that he wanted to be with her, that she didn't want to be with him.
And did this anger happen just this particular night, or was it something that kind of brewed up along the way, or like how did it happen? Can you explain that to me? Depression, in a way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just a sense of betrayal, feeling a sense of betrayal and sadness. I cared about her. I wanted to be with her at one point, but she didn't want to be with me.
Okay. Did you guys ever have any sort of a sexual relationship or an intimate relationship?
No, she didn't want to take that far on me.
No.
He felt a sense of betrayal by Keosha. He would give her rides to work, and he would do things, and yet she didn't really reciprocate in his mind.
I was being used, but I would, like, in my head, I'm like, maybe at some point, she'll, start to realize that what she's doing is wrong. It's not, the right thing to do, for somebody who has never done you any wrong in any way, shape, or form. It was like her lack of appreciation or her lack of, like, respect. I would always, help her out whenever she needed help with anything. And if I ever told her no, or if I ever said I couldn't give her anything, it's always a problem. I'm always wrong. I'm always, the bad guy. I can look in your eyes and I can tell by your body language that you're carrying this huge thing on your chest. And well, yeah, of course. The thing that I'm carrying on my chest right now is the fact that I'm going to be doing it the rest of my life.
Would you like to say a prayer right now?
I asked him if he wanted to say a prayer. I don't know why I did. I've never done that before.
It was the first time we've ever done it. But again, Chris is a different type of person from what we traditionally deal with. So it wasn't surprising that we ended the interview with a prayer.
Well, I'd say a prayer. Heavenly Father, rest in peace to Keosha Gilmore. May her soul ever remain in your grace. Rest in peace to her grandmother. Watch over her, watch over the Gilmore family. May that they pray that they get through the hard times. Pray that they stay strong. I say a prayer for my family, my friends, everybody in this world, and pray that everybody, stays healthy, and pray that we all, remain smart, remain wise, and just keep our heads up, through any difficult task. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
At the end of the interview, we explained to him that he's going to be charged with the murder of Keosha Gilmore, along with additional firearms charges.
For Keosha's family, news of Chris's arrest is met with mixed emotions.
I was in shock. I was just I cannot believe I didn't notice. I just thought he was strange. I didn't know that he was this obsessed with her.
It was like betrayal. She was your friend, and you did that to her.
As the DA prepares to take the case to trial, detectives conduct a search of Christopher's home, where they make even more unsettling discoveries.
His bedroom was very neat. He had a couple of unusual things that were a little bit strange to us. He had a number of birdhouses that were kind of lined up near his bed.
He had bins under his bed with action heroes in it, and things that would give you the idea that he was maybe a case of arrested development.
We ended up recovering a composite notebook that had a number of his writings.
He spent a great amount of time writing about Keosha Gilmore, about his desire for her, about how she was the love of his life, and about how he was the right man for her.
It was very clear that his obsession with Keosha was much stronger than probably anyone had realized. And it was very clear that he had some anger about his kind of being, in his mind, used, for lack of a better word, by Keosha. And he was kind of keeping all that anger pent up inside.
The state's theory was that Christopher Jackson had romantic feelings for a woman, a friend of his. The woman didn't share those romantic feelings and never would, and he knew it, and he became frustrated, and at some point in time, Christopher Jackson simply decided to kill her.
Those closest to Keosha believe her engagement to Michael Ferguson was the final straw that sent Chris over the edge.
It's just my own thought that maybe she called up an old friend and shared something that was exciting to her. And I think that she probably shared it totally not knowing about the journals and how he totally felt in his mind about her. And I think he pondered on that for a little while till he had an opportunity to do something heinous.
He waited until the darkness of night, and he went up to the car that she sat in and put a bullet into her head.
On May 26, 2016, Christopher Jackson is convicted of second-degree murder. He's sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole.
In Massachusetts, if you're convicted of second-degree murder, it's still a life sentence, but after 15 years, you're eligible for parole.
When they came back with the verdict, I was like, are they kidding me? Like, really? He totally followed her, stalked her. It definitely was first degree. What do they think?
He put her in a box of no return. So he should stay in jail with no return.
It should have been first-degree murder. I'm disappointed. Because when you have the mask, the glove, the hat, the gun, all in your getaway path, and you walk up to the car and you know that the person's dead, you had to have followed them. You shoot them cold-bloodedly, not once, but twice. You knew what you were doing.
You just never know when someone has an obsession they can't deal with. You just never know if someone is that jealous that they're gonna act out and they're going to do something that will change their lives and everyone else's life forever. And that is scary.
I think he's a monster. I don't think that any good person would kill someone just because they didn't share the same feeling that you felt. She did not deserve this. Keosha was a daughter, a sister, a future aunt, laughter, love. She taught me how to be a dad, and that's something I'll never forget.
you.